My name is Jenna Cole. I'm a nurse here in Phoenix, Arizona, working my shifts at the county hospital, surrounded by the beeps of monitors and the clean, sharp smell of antiseptics. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound completely crazy. Trust me, I get it. I'm a woman of science, of evidence-based practice. But I have to share this story because Jesus told me to. Just this week, 3 different people, 2 doctors and a patient's daughter, have pulled me aside and asked, Jenna, what happened to you? Because the truth is, I'm different now. My coworkers see it in the way I talk to frightened patients. My family sees it in the calm that has replaced my constant, low-level anxiety. Even my neighbor asked me why I seem so, I don't know how she put it, more alive. And the honest-to-God truth is that I am, because I died. It all started on October 15th of last year. I was doing something a person who gets lightheaded if I skip breakfast, had never really done before. A real fast. I'm not talking about intermittent fasting or just skipping lunch. I mean no food for 6 whole days, just water and my own stubborn will. I know what you're thinking because I thought it too. That sounds extreme, and it felt extreme. But I'd hit a wall. My younger brother, Liam, the person I loved most in this world, was drowning. He was losing his years-long battle with addiction, and after another failed rehab stint and a terrifying late-night phone call that left me shaking, I felt this overwhelming pull, a quiet but insistent whisper in my soul that God was asking me to do this. To fight for him in a way I had never fought before, so I did. The first few days were a blur of headaches and a near constant, gnawing hunger that made every food commercial on TV feel like a personal attack. But by day 6, something had shifted. I'm not going to lie, it was rough. I was tired, my hands had a slight tremor, but underneath the physical weakness was a strange and profound peace I had never experienced. My mind, usually a chaotic storm of nursing charts and worries about Liam, was quiet. It felt like my prayers were no longer just words I was throwing at the ceiling. They were sharper, more focused, like a clean, clear signal finally getting through. That morning, I was driving to my mom's house around 6:00 a.m. The sun was still just a rumor behind the distant mountains, painting the edges of the Phoenix sky in soft, bruised shades of purple and pink. The roads were empty, just the way I like them, a quiet asphalt river flowing through a sleeping city. My old Honda hummed along, worship music playing softly through the speakers, a gentle counterpoint to the quiet hum in my own body. There was a tremor in my hands as I held the steering wheel, a physical reminder of the emptiness in my stomach, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. The constant, frantic buzz of 1,000 worries had been replaced by a single, focused, and profoundly peaceful note. And on that note, I prayed for my brother. It wasn't a formal prayer with fancy words. It was a raw, desperate conversation, the kind you have when you have nothing left. God, you see him, don't you? The words formed in my heart, a silent, aching plea. You see Liam, not the addict, not the statistics, not the police report. You see the little boy who used to build epic Lego castles in the living room, the one who had a secret handshake with our dog. You see the teenager who was so brilliant and funny he could make anyone laugh, the one who was supposed to do so much more than this. Tears began to well in my eyes, hot and slow. I wasn't crying from sadness, but from a love so fierce it felt like it was the only thing holding me together. Where did he go, Lord? I keep looking for him in his eyes in the rare moments he calls, but I can't find him. He's a prisoner in his own life, and I don't know how to pick the lock. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I thought about the last time I'd seen him, the hollow look in his eyes, the thinness of his frame, the ghost of the brother I adored. We had tried everything: interventions, rehabs, tough love, gentle love. Nothing worked, nothing broke through the wall that the addiction had built around him. This fast felt like my last, desperate resort, my final, foolish act of hope. I'm empty, Lord, the prayer continued, my gaze fixed on the unfolding ribbon of road ahead. I've emptied myself of food, of my own strength, of every solution I thought I had. I'm just empty. And I'm asking you, I'm begging you, to fill this space I've made with a miracle for him. I don't care about me, just please save my brother. Break his chains, bring him home. The soft melody from the radio filled the car, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't just desperate hope, but a real and certain peace. A quiet assurance settled in my soul, a feeling that my prayer, this raw cry from an empty and aching heart, was not just being heard, but was actually doing something. In the quiet of my car, watching the desert sunrise paint the world in gold, I felt a genuine belief that a breakthrough was finally coming. And in that moment of serene, sun-drenched peace, the world ended. It didn't fade, it was violently shattered. There was no warning, just a sudden, horrifying peripheral flash of red metal and chrome, a monster appearing where a moment before there was nothing. A pickup truck, its grille a grotesque, roaring mouth, was filling my driver's side window. I heard the tortured screech of tires, a sound that seemed to last for an eternity in the split second before impact. Then everything was a deafening, grinding roar, the sound of the world being torn apart. The impact was not a crash, it was a physical deletion. My small Honda was simply erased by the truck's massive force. I felt a violent, bone-shattering shove as my world tumbled and spun in a chaotic vortex of shrieking metal and the crystalline explosion of glass. Then a final, brutal stop, and then everything went black. The doctors would later tell me, with a clinical precision that still chills me, that my heart stopped beating for exactly 17 minutes and 23 seconds. But in that place beyond time, those 17 minutes felt like an age, a lifetime. 1 second, I was pinned inside the crushed, twisted metal of my car, the scent of gasoline and my own blood filling the air. The next, I simply wasn't. The pain vanished, the terror was gone. The deafening noise was replaced by a profound, all-encompassing silence. I was floating, gently, weightlessly, up near the traffic light that the drunk driver had ignored. Below me was the entire, tragic scene laid out like a grim diorama. I could see the wreckage of my car, crumpled like a discarded soda can. I could see the paramedics, their faces a mask of focused intensity, working frantically on the broken body that had been mine just moments before. I watched with a strange, clinical detachment as they cut away my clothes, placed the paddles on my chest, and sent a jolt of electricity through a body I no longer felt. I should have been panicking, I should have been screaming, but there was only a quiet, calm curiosity. My gaze drifted. I saw the drunk driver, a man in a stained t-shirt, sitting on the curb, his body racked with guttural, soul-shattering sobs as he clutched his head in his hands. I saw Mrs. Henderson from down the street, standing on the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn in a pink chenille robe and slippers, her hand over her mouth in horror. There should have been a storm of emotions inside me, anger at the driver, grief for my own lost life, but there was nothing. That's the weird part, the part that's so hard to explain. The peace I had felt in the car before the crash was just a pale shadow of this. This was an absolute, unshakable peace, a deep and certain knowing that everything, even this horror, was somehow okay. It was the most peaceful I had ever felt in my entire life. I was a witness to my own death, and I felt nothing but a serene, loving calm. As I watched the frantic, earthly drama unfold, I became aware of a new sensation. A gentle but insistent pulling, a current of energy from somewhere above and behind me inviting me to leave this scene behind. It was time to go. I let go, I surrendered to the gentle current and the tragic scene of my death, the flashing lights, the wreckage, the weeping faces, began to shrink below me, folding in on itself until it was just a pinpoint of sorrow that winked out and was gone. I was moving upward, not through a dark and scary void, but through a tunnel made of the very substance of life itself. It was made of light, but a kind of light I had never known. I know that sounds crazy, but it was a living light, a light that had a personality. It was warm and welcoming, wrapping around me like a loving embrace, carrying me forward on a gentle, shimmering river of pure energy. It felt less like I was traveling and more like I was finally coming home. There was a peace in that passage that was even deeper than the calm I had felt floating above the crash. It was a peace of arrival, of purpose. When I emerged from the tunnel, it was not into a place, but into a state of being. The sheer, breathtaking beauty of it is something my human words will always fail to capture. I was in an infinite expanse, a reality that seemed to be made of music and color. I saw colors that have no name on earth, hues so vibrant and pure that you felt them in your soul more than you saw them with your eyes. There was music that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of existence, a symphony of perfect harmony that was both everywhere at once and intimately inside of me. And the light was brighter than 1,000 suns, yet it didn't hurt to look at. It was a nourishing, life-giving light that I seemed to breathe into my very essence, making me feel more whole, more real than I had ever felt in my life. But as my spiritual senses adjusted to this overwhelming beauty, My attention was drawn to something even more incredible, a sight that eclipsed everything else. Stretching up from what I knew was the direction of Earth, reaching into this heavenly realm were countless golden threads of light. There were thousands, maybe millions of them, a vast, shimmering cosmic forest. They were all different. Some were as thick and brilliant as ropes of molten gold, pulsing with a powerful, rhythmic light. Others were impossibly thin, faint, and flickering, barely visible against the brighter background. They were all alive, a dynamic, breathtaking tapestry of connection between the world I had just left and the place I was now. I was utterly transfixed, my being filled with a silent, awe-filled question: what are they? That's when I heard his voice, Jenna. It wasn't a sound that entered my ears because I had no ears. It was a thought, a feeling, a perfect understanding that bloomed directly in the center of my being. And I knew with an instant and absolute certainty that defied all logic that it was Jesus. I just knew. His voice was a current of pure love that flowed through me, and in that single word I felt completely and utterly known and completely and utterly loved. Then the voice came again, gentle and powerful. I brought you here to show you something your eyes have never seen. As his thought filled my soul, a form coalesced from the living light in front of me. I've seen pictures of Jesus my entire life. I've seen him in reverent paintings, in classic movies, and staring down with sad, stained glass eyes from 100 church windows. None of them came close. None of them even hinted at the reality. His presence was an overwhelming force, a perfect fusion of pure, unconditional love and absolute creation-spanning power that radiated from him in tangible waves. It was like standing at the shore of an ocean of love, the warmth of its waves washing over me and through me. His eyes, they held a depth that was both eternal and immediate. I felt as if in a single glance he saw every moment of my life, every secret thought, every hidden shame, every quiet act of kindness. He saw the complete, unedited truth of me, and the love that shone back at me was not diminished by it. In fact, it felt like it intensified. He loved me anyway. A single, gentle thought formed from him to me: watch. He then pointed, his form gesturing towards the vast, cosmic forest of golden threads that had so captivated me. You see those? He asked. I could only nod, my spiritual form conveying an overwhelming yes. I couldn't stop looking at them. They were the most beautiful and mysterious things I had ever seen. Those are people fasting and praying right now on Earth. The understanding hit me with the force of a physical blow. My mouth, which I didn't have but could still feel, dropped open in sheer, unadulterated awe. Each and every one of those shimmering, pulsing threads was a direct, active connection, a soul reaching out, a heart crying out. Each thread was someone who had made the choice to deny their body in order to seek God. Why are some so much brighter than others? I wondered, my gaze drawn to the brilliant, thick ropes of light that pulsed with an incredible energy, and then to the thin, flickering threads that seemed in danger of winking out. Jesus answered the question in my heart. The bright ones, the really brilliant threads, those belong to people who aren't just going through the motions. They truly mean it, their hearts are pure. They are not fasting to be seen by others, or to lose weight, or out of empty religious duty. They are fasting out of a deep, humble, and sometimes desperate love for me and for others. He then guided my attention to one particularly bright thread near me, a beautiful cord of golden light that was pulsing with a steady, powerful rhythm. As I focused on it, the scene shifted. I was no longer just seeing a thread, I was seeing its source. I saw a small, elderly woman in a simple floral print dress, kneeling beside an old armchair in a modest living room somewhere in Ohio. Her eyes were closed, her face was a roadmap of a long and difficult life, and her gnarled hands were clasped tightly in prayer. I knew instantly that this was Margaret. And I could feel her prayer. It was not a grand or eloquent speech. It was a simple, powerful, and relentless river of love and concern flowing from her heart. She was praying for her grandson. I was shown a brief, heartbreaking glimpse of him, a teenager angry and lost, falling in with the wrong crowd, his own light dimming. Then I saw what Margaret's prayer, empowered by her 3-day fast, was doing in the spiritual realm. Her golden thread was connected to her grandson, and it was forming a shield of light around him, a protective barrier that was making it harder for the dark, shadowy influences around him to get through. It wasn't controlling his will, but it was protecting him and keeping the door open for grace to find him. The vision faded, and I was back with Jesus, tears of awe streaming down my face. Most of my children don't understand the power they have access to, Jesus explained, his voice full of a tender, loving frustration. When you fast with the right heart, seeking me and my kingdom, you partner with heaven in ways you can't possibly imagine. Now, let me show you what your fast has been creating. He turned my attention to my own golden thread. I hadn't dared to look for it before, but now I saw it distinct and brilliant. I watched a replay of the last 6 days from heaven's perspective. On day one, my thread was thin, flickering with a mixture of desperate hope and caffeine withdrawal-induced doubt. But as each day passed, as I pushed through the physical weakness and clung to my singular, desperate prayer for Liam, I saw the thread grow stronger, thicker, and brighter. The light became more pure, more steady. It was like watching a muscle grow stronger and more defined with each workout, the spiritual fibers knitting together to create a powerful, clear connection between my breaking heart and the heart of heaven. I was in awe, realizing that my small, painful act of sacrifice was creating something real, something substantial in this higher reality. But what you've created for your brother is just the beginning. The thought from Jesus bloomed in my mind, filled with a grander purpose. To truly understand the power you are partnering with, you must see it outside of your own time. The scene of the cosmic threads shifted, and the light around us seemed to fold in on itself, carrying us through a breathtaking passage into a place he called the halls of time. It was like an infinite, living museum where every moment in history was preserved and could be witnessed, and he took me to see the giants. We were standing on the wind-whipped, rocky peak of Mount Sinai. The air was thin and crackled with a raw, divine energy. I saw Moses, his face thin and gaunt from 40 days without food, his eyes blazing with a holy light. He was standing before the terrifying, glorious presence of God, a pillar of smoke and fire. But I was shown the spiritual reality behind the physical scene. Moses' extended fast wasn't a feat of endurance to impress God, it was a spiritual necessity. I could see that his fasting was creating a thinning of the veil, a sacred space of purity around him that allowed his physical body to withstand the raw, untamed glory of God's presence. His sacrifice literally carved out a space in the physical world for the divine law to be written on stone. The scene dissolved and reformed. We were in ancient Babylon. I could feel the spiritual atmosphere of the city. It was a heavy, oppressive blanket of pride, luxury, and the worship of false gods. And in a simple room, I saw the prophet Daniel. He was fasting, his body weak but his spirit a brilliant, defiant light in the suffocating darkness. I saw his golden thread, and it wasn't just going up. It was expanding outward in powerful, concentric waves. I watched, mesmerized, as these waves of pure, consecrated prayer pushed back against the dark spiritual principalities that held influence over the king and the entire region. The shadowy forces recoiled from the light generated by this one man's humble sacrifice. He was shifting the spiritual atmosphere of an empire from his knees. Then I was shown a sweeping montage of countless others throughout history. A monk in a cold, stone cell whose fasting helped birth a reformation. A group of ordinary mothers in a small village whose combined fast broke the power of a deadly plague. Soldiers in a desperate war whose prayers on an empty stomach turned the tide of a battle they were about to lose. All these acts, most of them hidden and unknown on Earth, had shifted events and altered the course of history. The visions faded, and I was back with Jesus, my soul trembling with the weight of what I had seen. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new and urgent seriousness. "Jenna," he said, and the name on his lips was both a comfort and a commission. "I am showing you this because my church, my people, are entering a season where understanding this will be crucial. The battles that are coming cannot be won through regular prayer alone." The weight of his words hung in the airless expanse of heaven. The battles ahead can't be won through regular prayer alone. My soul formed a question, a silent, anxious cry. What battles, what's coming? I needed to know to understand the future I was apparently being prepared for. But Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, knew I needed to understand the weapon before I understood the war. He gently guided my awareness back to the vast tapestry of golden threads. His voice, now filled with a solemn, instructional gravity, bloomed in my mind. "But daughter, not all fasting carries the same weight. The sacrifice of the body is meaningless if the heart is not also a sacrifice. Watch." He directed my focus to a single thread amidst the millions. It was a sickly, pale yellow, flickering erratically like a faulty light bulb. It was thin and weak, barely maintaining its connection. As I looked closer, the vision shifted and I was shown its source. It was a man, well-dressed and respected, standing before his congregation, publicly announcing that he was undertaking a 3-day fast for spiritual renewal. He looked pious, he sounded humble, but Jesus allowed me to perceive the man's heart. His inner thoughts were a cacophony of pride. I could hear his secret calculations. This will make them see how serious I am about my faith. Pastor John will be so impressed. I can't wait to post about it on day 3. I felt the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, but it was coupled with a detailed, almost lustful anticipation of the huge steak dinner he was planning for the moment the fast ended. His sacrifice was a performance. It was a transaction designed to earn the admiration of men, not to draw closer to the heart of God. And in heaven, his grand gesture was producing only the faintest, most pathetic flicker of light. Then Jesus pulled my attention to another thread. This one was almost hidden, tucked away behind several brighter ones, but its light was so pure, so intensely brilliant, it was almost painful to look at. It was a silent, searing laser of pure white gold light, pulsing with a power that dwarfed the threads around it. Now see this one, Jesus urged. The vision zoomed in again. I saw a young woman, a single mother in a small, tidy apartment. Her child was asleep in the next room. She was on her knees on a worn-out rug, her face buried in her hands. No one on earth knew she was fasting. There were no announcements, no social media posts. It was a secret covenant between her and her God, and I could feel her heart. It was a torrent of pure, unadulterated humility. She wasn't praying for a new car or a promotion. She was weeping in repentance for a harsh word she had spoken to her child that day, begging God to give her more patience, more love. She was emptying herself not to be seen, but to be filled. Her hunger was not a performance. It was a desperate, holy ache for more of his presence in her life. The vision faded, and I was left with the profound, undeniable truth. Jesus confirmed it. The physical act of abstaining from food is merely the turning of a key, but it is the posture of the heart that determines whether the door will actually open. Fasting done with pride is an empty, clanging noise in this realm. But fasting done with humility, with true repentance, and with a pure and desperate desire to simply know me, that, my daughter, is a symphony that shakes the foundations of heaven and terrifies the darkness. I immediately thought of my own fast. Had my motives been pure? Was I just trying to force God's hand, to manipulate him into healing my brother? A wave of self-doubt washed over me. Your heart was pure in its desperation, Jenna. His voice comforted me instantly. And that purity does more than just make a connection. It changes the one who is fasting. His words of comfort settled my heart, and I understood that my desperate love for my brother had been a pure enough fuel for the journey I was on. But I was about to learn that the purpose of fasting was far deeper than just sending a powerful prayer up to heaven. It was also about fundamentally changing the person who was praying. That purity does more than just make a connection, his thought continued, pulling my focus from the state of my own heart to the very nature of my soul. It changes you, it rewires you. He then showed me something that, as a nurse familiar with biology and human anatomy, absolutely astounded me. He showed me the spiritual anatomy of a believer. The vision before me was of a human soul, represented as a beautiful, intricate landscape of light. And running through this landscape were countless pathways, like a complex network of rivers or neural connections. These pathways, Jesus explained, are how my children receive from heaven. It is through these channels that they experience my peace, hear my voice, and discern truth. He first showed me the soul of an average, well-intentioned believer. The pathways were there, but they were small, like little dirt tracks, somewhat overgrown and clogged with the debris of worldly cares, anxieties, and the constant noise of a busy life. I could see the light of heaven trying to flow through these channels, but it was just a trickle, often getting blocked or diverted. Then, Jesus showed me what happens during a sincere, extended fast. I watched as the act of sacrifice, of a heart turned fully toward God, acted like a spiritual excavator. The fast began to clear the debris from those overgrown paths. It was hard, slow work. With each day of the fast, the pathways became a little wider, a little clearer. Finally, he showed me the soul of that same believer after the fast was over. I gasped. The small dirt tracks had been transformed into wide, deep, luminous canyons. They were permanent fixtures in the soul's landscape now. The light of heaven flowed through them not as a trickle, but as a powerful, rushing river. Fasting literally changes your spiritual DNA, he explained, giving me a concept my scientific mind could grasp. You have physical senses, but you also have spiritual senses to see, to hear, and to discern the things of my kingdom. For most of my children, these senses are dull, out of practice. Fasting awakens and sharpens them. It is a spiritual upgrade. He explained that these new, wider pathways created by the fast were permanent. They allowed the believer to operate with a greater sensitivity to his presence, to hear his voice more clearly, and to feel the difference between his truth and the enemy's deception, even when they weren't actively fasting. It was a fundamental change to their spiritual operating system. I was in awe. It made a strange kind of sense to me. In my work, I saw how discipline, diet, and exercise could physically transform a human body. This was the spiritual equivalent, the disciplined sacrifice of the body leading to a permanent transformation of the soul. The upgrade, however, wasn't an end in itself. It had a greater purpose. This upgrade isn't for your benefit alone. His voice filled my being with a new layer of understanding. It fundamentally changes how you interact with me. It's not about making your voice louder so I can hear you better. It's about making your spiritual ears more sensitive so you can better hear what I am already saying. That last thought resonated through me with the force of a revelation. My entire life, I had viewed prayer as a kind of one-way conversation where I talked and God hopefully listened. The idea that a huge part of it was about me learning to listen better was a paradigm shift. Jesus seemed to sense my dawning understanding and expanded on it, using a metaphor that was so simple and yet so profound. Many of my children, Jenna, see fasting as a way to get me to do something. His voice explained, full of a gentle patience. They treat it like a spiritual hunger strike, a way to prove their seriousness so I will finally grant their petition. But fasting isn't about convincing me. My heart is already turned toward them. It's about positioning yourself to partner with what I am already wanting to do. To help me understand, he showed me a new vision. I saw heaven not as a place, but as a colossal, radiant broadcasting tower, more magnificent than anything man has ever built. From this tower, a constant, powerful signal was being emitted, flowing out into the universe. It wasn't a radio wave, it was a wave of pure, divine purpose. It was a broadcast of God's will, His solutions, His strategies, His love, His healing power for the earth. It was a ceaseless, perfect transmission of everything His children needed. Then the vision shifted, and I was looking down at a believer on earth, a good person with a loving heart. But their soul was surrounded by a thick, swirling cloud of crackling, noisy static. I could perceive what the static was made of. Part of it was the constant, nagging demands of the physical body: hunger, fatigue, desire. Another part was the anxiety of the mind, worries about bills, stress from work, fears about the future. And a huge part of it was the relentless, deafening noise of the world, the constant barrage of social media, the anger of the 24-hour news cycle, the endless distractions. I watched as the clear, powerful signal from heaven's broadcast reached the believer, but it was almost completely drowned out by the cloud of static. Only a faint, distorted whisper of the original, perfect signal could get through. The believer would pray, but their prayers were often just a reflection of their own anxieties and desires, a broadcast from within their own bubble of static, not a response to the clear will being broadcasted from heaven. Then I saw the believer begin a sincere fast. With each day that they chose to deny the demands of their body, I saw the physical static begin to quiet down. As they chose to turn off the noise of the world and focus their mind on God, the cultural and emotional static began to dissipate. The fast was acting like a divine tuning dial. It wasn't making heaven's signal stronger. Heaven was already broadcasting at full power. The fast was simply reducing the interference on their end. Finally, I saw the believer in a state of deep fasting. The cloud of static was almost completely gone. And the signal from heaven was coming through, crystal clear. The believer's prayers changed. They were no longer just a list of desperate requests. They were declarations of faith, spoken in perfect harmony with the will that was now being clearly received. Fasting doesn't change my mind, Jesus explained as the vision faded. It clarifies yours. It is the discipline that quiets your world enough so you can finally tune your spiritual frequency to heaven's frequency. It allows you to stop praying against the static and start praying in harmony with the song I am already singing. The truth of it settled into me with a profound weight. I had spent so much of my life trying to shout my plans up to God, when all He wanted was for me to get quiet enough to hear the brilliant plans He was already broadcasting down to me. And when you are perfectly in tune with this frequency, his final thought for this lesson came, filled with a new and awesome power. The words you speak of your prayers become something more. They become weapons. The word weapons hung in the holy air, shifting the entire atmosphere from one of peaceful learning to one of awesome, serious purpose. I had always thought of prayer as a plea, a form of communication. I had never conceived of it as an act of war. Jesus then showed me exactly what he meant. The vision shifted again, and I was witnessing a scene that was both mundane and magnificent at the same time. On earth, in a quiet bedroom, a young man was kneeling beside his bed. He was in the middle of an extended fast, and physically he looked exhausted. But in the spiritual realm, which I could now see with perfect clarity, he was anything but weak. He was a giant, a warrior clad in radiant, form-fitting armor that seemed to be woven from pure, solidified light. This armor pulsed with a gentle, protective energy, and I understood that it was forged from his sacrifice, his humility, and his deep connection to God. I watched as he began to pray not for himself, but for a friend of his who, I was made to understand, was spiraling into a deep, dark depression. As the young man spoke his friend's name, the words leaving his lips manifested in the spiritual realm as something tangible and powerful. They were like precise, shimmering javelins of light. I watched, breathless, as one of these prayer javelins launched from the kneeling warrior, streaked across a spiritual landscape and struck its target. I saw his friend, sitting alone in a dark room, with a heavy, oppressive, shadowy cloud hanging over him, whispering lies of hopelessness and despair. When the javelin of light struck that cloud, it didn't explode. It pierced it, and a brilliant light began to pour through the hole, causing the dark cloud to recoil and dissipate. The young man on his knees had, through his fasting and prayer, launched a direct and effective strike against the darkness afflicting his friend. But his powerful prayers did not go unnoticed. As the javelins of light continued to find their mark, I saw the enemy's reaction. The dark, shadowy beings that were tormenting the depressed friend turned their attention to the source of the light, the fasting warrior. I watched in horror as they launched a vicious counterattack. It wasn't a physical assault, but a psychological and spiritual one. They hurled fiery darts of temptation at him, sudden, intense urges and cravings designed to break his fast. They shot arrows of doubt into his mind, whispering, "This is pointless, you're just starving yourself. God isn't listening, your friend is a lost cause." They tried to wrap him in a heavy blanket of discouragement, a spiritual weariness designed to make him give up. It was a terrifying assault, but I watched as the warrior's armor of light flared brilliantly, deflecting most of the darts before they could find their mark. Some still hit, and I could feel his struggle, but the armor held. The enemy specifically targets people during fasting because he knows its power, Jesus' voice explained, solemn and firm. When you engage in this level of spiritual warfare, you become a visible threat. That is why protection is not optional, it is essential. He showed me that the armor the man was wearing was not generated by his own willpower. It was a shield powered by his constant reliance on God. Stay under the cover of my blood and my word. The command was both a warning and a promise. Do not fast in your own strength, for your own strength will fail. Fast in my strength, and you will be protected. I understood. Fasting made you a powerful soldier in God's army, but it also painted a target on your back. It was a discipline that required not only sacrifice, but a radical and constant dependence on the commander. This armor, these weapons, Jesus' thought continued, pulling my focus to a new level of understanding. They are a sign of the authority you are positioned to carry. Let me show you what that means. The concept of prayer as a weapon was still settling into my soul when Jesus shifted the vision once more, taking my understanding to an even deeper level. Let me show you what that authority means. His thought resonated, and the scene of the spiritual battlefield dissolved. We were now in a place that I can only describe as a heavenly courtroom. It was a vast, solemn, and silent expanse, not made of marble or wood, but of pure, solid light. There was a sense of ancient, unshakable justice in this place, a feeling of absolute rightness. Before us stood a magnificent set of celestial scales, like the scales of justice, shimmering as if forged from a star. A glorious, empty throne was visible beyond them, radiating an authority so immense it was almost a physical pressure. Jesus then showed me two prayers being brought before this seat of cosmic justice. First, I saw a prayer from a good, faithful woman on earth who was not fasting. Her prayer, born of a sincere heart, manifested as a small, beautiful, glowing stone. It was placed on one side of the great scales, and the scale dipped, acknowledging its value. The prayer was heard, it had substance. Then Jesus showed me a second prayer. This one came from a man who was deep in a sincere, humble fast. His prayer manifested not as a small stone, but as a large, heavy, incredibly dense sphere of brilliant, white-hot light, like a piece of a sun. When this sphere was placed on the scale, it didn't just dip. It slammed down with a resounding, silent weight, its impact sending shimmering ripples through the very fabric of the courtroom. The difference in spiritual weight was undeniable. I looked at Jesus, my mind full of questions. Was the second prayer better, more loved? He immediately corrected my flawed human assumption. All sincere prayers from my children are precious to me, he explained. The first prayer was beautiful and it was heard. But the prayer of a fasting believer carries a different kind of authority in this spiritual, legal realm. The sacrifice of the self, the humility of the heart, the focused desperation of the spirit, it adds a divine gravity to their petitions. Then he gave me the most important clarification of all. But remember this, Jenna, his voice was firm but loving. This authority isn't earned, it is granted, it is entrusted. He gave me an analogy I could understand. A wise and loving king has many loyal subjects. But he doesn't give the royal signet ring, the symbol of his own authority to enact his will, to just anyone. He entrusts it to the one who has proven their loyalty, the one who has demonstrated that their will is completely aligned with the king's. Fasting, Jesus explained, is not a way to earn brownie points with me. It is a way you demonstrate the seriousness of your desire to align your will with mine. It is a way of saying, Lord, my own desires, my own comfort, even my own needs are secondary to your purpose. I saw it then with perfect clarity. The sacrifice didn't force God's hand. The sacrifice was a signal to all of heaven that this person could be trusted. It was like watching someone get promoted in heaven's army. Because they had proven they could handle the discipline of the sacrifice, they could be entrusted with greater authority to carry out the king's commands. Their words now carried more weight. Their prayers had a greater legal impact in this heavenly court. But this authority isn't just for warfare and legal petitions. His thought shifted, the atmosphere of the grand courtroom softening into something more intimate and beautiful. The sacrifice of a fast creates something else here in heaven, a beautiful fragrance. The vision of the heavenly courtroom dissolved, replaced by an even more beautiful sight. I was witnessing the worship of heaven itself, an infinite chorus of radiant beings singing a song of such love and beauty that it was the source of all the music I had felt. Then, Jesus directed my attention to a single golden thread connected to a fasting believer on earth. I watched as that person in the midst of their sacrifice began to worship. As they did, their golden thread began to release a visible, shimmering substance. It was like a fragrant, holy incense made of pure light, which drifted upward and mingled with the worship of heaven. It added a new, precious, and indescribably beautiful note to the celestial symphony. When my children worship while fasting, Jesus explained, the sacrifice adds a special fragrance to their praise. It is a worship that costs them something, and that sacrifice creates a unique and beautiful harmony with the song of heaven. The beauty of it was overwhelming, a moment of pure, intimate connection. After letting me experience it, the tone of his communication shifted, becoming focused and purposeful once more. Now you understand the beauty of the sacrifice, Jenna, but it is time for you to understand its power. It is time for you to see why I called you to this fast for your brother. The scene shifted with a jarring, painful lurch. I was no longer in the heart of heavenly worship. I was seeing my brother Liam. He was in a dark, squalid apartment, his body thin, his eyes hollow and lost. The sight of him, so broken and so far from the vibrant boy I grew up with, was a fresh wound in my soul. But Jesus was showing me more than just the physical reality. He allowed me to see the spiritual truth of Liam's condition. In the spiritual realm, my brother was bound, head to foot, in thick, heavy chains. They were not made of iron, but of something far stronger. Solidified despair, coils of self-loathing, and ancient links of generational curses. I could see that these chains were alive, whispering the same lies of the addiction over and over, keeping him a willing prisoner in his own private hell. The sight was horrifying, the chains so thick and strong they seemed utterly unbreakable. I felt a wave of hopelessness wash over me. But then I saw it. My own golden thread, the one I had seen being strengthened over 6 days, was connected to this dark scene. But it was not just a connection, it was an active weapon. The end of my thread was glowing with an intense, white-hot energy like a spiritual blowtorch. And it was pressed directly against the thickest chain around my brother's heart. I watched, mesmerized, as my constant, focused prayer and physical sacrifice fueled this spiritual flame. The dark chain began to glow red, then white-hot, under the intense pressure of my fast. Tiny hairline cracks began to appear in its surface. It was not a fast process. It was a slow, arduous, and difficult work, but it was working. The chains were weakening. For the first time, I understood. The hunger pangs, the weakness, the shaking hands, they weren't just signs of my own suffering. They were the vibrations of the spiritual hammer I was wielding against my brother's prison. I was not a helpless sister praying from a distance. I was a soldier in the trenches, actively engaged in the battle for his soul. A sob of pure, overwhelming realization tore through me. The tears flowed freely again, but this time they were tears of awe, of gratitude, and of a profound, earth-shaking understanding. God had been preparing me, equipping me, to fight for my brother in a way I never knew was possible. When you fast and pray with faith for the deliverance of another, Jesus' voice was a gentle comfort in my catharsis. You partner with my ongoing work of intercession. You join me in the battle, and that partnership, that selfless love, moves my heart. My small, painful fast was a joyful collaboration with the King of the universe. And in that moment, I knew with every fiber of my being that my brother's chains were going to break. My time in heaven was ending. I felt the gentle but irreversible pull back towards the world, a bittersweet sorrow mixed with a new, unshakable purpose. Jesus' final thought to me was a promise: remember, the power isn't in the fasting itself. The power is in me. Fasting simply positions you to partner with what I am already wanting to do. Then, the light faded, and I was back in the cacophony of the hospital, the miracle of my survival baffling the doctors and nurses who had pronounced me dead. They couldn't explain how I had returned after over 17 minutes without a heartbeat, let alone how I had returned with no brain damage. They called it a miracle, and I knew they didn't even know the half of it. The 3 months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. My body healed, but my soul ached with a profound spiritual homesickness. Having witnessed the vibrant, loving reality of heaven, the world now seemed like a faded, gray, and broken imitation. The constant, low-level anger I saw on the news, the petty arguments I overheard at the grocery store, the casual bitterness, it all felt like a physical abrasion on my spirit. I tried to share what I had seen, but the words felt clumsy and inadequate. My parents believed me, their own faith reignited by the miracle of my return. But others, they looked at me with pity. They told me it was a beautiful, trauma-induced hallucination, my brain's way of coping. Their skepticism was a heavy cloak, and I began to feel isolated, a stranger in my own life, burdened with a message that the world seemed determined not to hear. Yet I clung to the truths I had learned. My prayer life was transformed. My relationship with God was no longer a distant, formal thing. It was an ongoing conversation with the King who had personally shown me the battlefield. And so, 3 months after the accident, I did it again. I began a 7-day fast. This time, it wasn't born of wild desperation, but of quiet, disciplined love, a desire to quiet the static of the world and tune my soul back to that heavenly frequency. On the final day of the fast, I was in my bedroom, deep in prayer. I wasn't in an accident. There was no violence, no warning. I simply felt a strange, sudden lightness in my chest, a peaceful sense of detachment, and then a gentle, familiar pull. The walls of my bedroom dissolved into the living, pearlescent light of the tunnel, and in an instant I was back. The journey that had been so new and overwhelming before was now a swift, joyful, and familiar homecoming. The celestial hum, the colors that you feel, the all-consuming love, it washed over me like a reunion with my oldest and dearest friend. And he was there, waiting for me in the heart of the light. His presence was just as awesome, just as powerful as before, but this time the greeting felt different. It was less like a king revealing his kingdom and more like a proud, loving friend, eager to share a precious secret. A joyful, loving thought bloomed in my soul. Welcome back, Jenna. I've brought you here again to show you the fruit of what you've learned. His thought had barely finished forming in my soul when the brilliant, uniform light of heaven transformed into a new and breathtaking vision. I was looking down upon the earth, which appeared like a dark, sleeping marble suspended in the cosmos. Then, a single, tiny golden thread, like the ones I had seen before, appeared, stretching from the surface of the planet up towards where we were. Then another appeared and another. Soon, dozens, then hundreds of threads were igniting, multiplying across the continents until they formed shimmering streams, then powerful, flowing rivers of pure golden light, all ascending to heaven. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, a reverse meteor shower of prayer and hope. I was so overcome with the sheer beauty of it that it took me a moment to understand what Jesus was showing me. Watch, his thought was a gentle guide. Every truth you have shared has planted a seed. This is the fruit. My entire being shuddered with a joy so profound it was almost painful. Each point of light was someone who had heard my story, my testimony, and had been moved to begin their own journey of prayer and fasting. My small, clumsy words, my fumbling attempts to describe the indescribable had not been in vain. The vision then zoomed in with incredible speed, focusing on one of the brilliant new streams of light. I was now witnessing a scene in a city I didn't recognize. I saw a man in his 50s, his face etched with worry, on his knees in his study. He was on day 4 of a fast, praying for his daughter. I was shown a glimpse of her, a young woman trapped in the cold, gray world of a devastating eating disorder. And just as I had seen with my brother, I could now see the dark, spiritual chains of self-hatred and deception wrapped around her. But I also saw her father's golden thread, fueled by his sacrificial love, acting as a gentle but persistent warmth, loosening those chains, introducing a light into her darkness that she hadn't felt in years. The vision shifted. I saw a woman in her own hospital bed, thin and pale, her body ravaged by cancer. But she was fasting from television, from negativity, from everything but the presence of God. And I saw how her sacrifice was creating an atmosphere of peace and healing in her room that was so tangible. The nurses who entered felt it without knowing why. Her golden thread was not a desperate plea for life, but a radiant beacon of trust, and it was bringing a piece of heaven's peace down into a sterile hospital room. Then he showed me something that touched me the most. He didn't just show me the results, he showed me the process. I was allowed to witness the intimate, secret moments of communion these people were having with him during their fasts. I saw them weeping with newfound joy, feeling his love in a way they never had before, receiving revelation and wisdom for their lives. The true fruit wasn't just the answered prayers. It was the deepened, loving relationship they were forging with their Creator. I saw how my single story had created a ripple effect, a spiritual multiplication that I could never have imagined. The father whose daughter was being set free would now have a testimony. The woman in the hospital would become a source of profound peace to others. Their stories would plant more seeds, which would bear more fruit, creating waves of revival. Do you see? Jesus asked, his voice a symphony of joy. What I showed you was not just for you, it was for my beloved church. The days ahead will require my people to walk in levels of spiritual authority they've never known before. What I showed you about fasting isn't optional. It is essential preparation for what's coming. Now you must go back and tell them again. But this time, tell them with the authority of one who has seen the fruit. The vision of the multiplying lights, the fruit of a single shared testimony, filled my soul with a joy I never thought possible. Jesus' presence was warm and proud, like a master craftsman showing off the beautiful work of his apprentices. Then, just before everything began to fade for the second time, he gave me one final message, a clarification that was the most important piece of all. Tell them, his voice was a clear, loving command, that I am not calling them to fasting to earn my love. They already have that completely and unconditionally. I am calling them to fasting because I long to entrust them with my power. The darkness in the world is increasing, Jenna. But through prayer and fasting, my light in them will shine brighter still. And with that final promise, the light of heaven receded and I was back. This time, there was no violent reentry, no choking on tubes. I simply took a deep, peaceful breath and opened my eyes to the familiar sight of my own bedroom ceiling. I was home, and my conviction was sealed not just in memory, but in the tangible fruit I had now been allowed to witness. This second experience left me with an unshakable certainty. I knew why God had allowed me to see these incredible secret things. Jesus is calling his church, all of us, to rediscover the power of biblical fasting. Not as a way to manipulate him or to earn his favor through our suffering, but as a way of intentionally, humbly positioning ourselves to partner with heaven in these crucial times. And my brother Liam, the very reason my journey began about 2 months after my second trip to heaven. During my third extended fast, he called my mom. He was crying. He said he didn't know why, but he had woken up that morning, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt a flicker of hope. He said he was tired of running. He checked himself into a detox facility that very day. My brother Liam has been clean now for 8 months. The breakthrough we had all prayed and agonized over for a decade finally came. Coincidence? I don't think so. The question isn't whether Jesus is calling us to fasting. He so clearly is. The question is, how will we respond? If you are listening to my voice right now, I truly believe it is not by accident. This is your invitation. Jesus is personally inviting you into a deeper understanding and practice of fasting, not as a grim, religious obligation to be endured, but as a thrilling opportunity for a profound partnership with heaven. The spiritual realm is more real, more substantial than anything we can see or touch with our physical senses. Through the simple, powerful, and biblical act of fasting, we can tune our souls to his frequency, wear his armor, and partner with him in ways that will not only transform our own lives and the lives of those we love, but will impact generations to come. The time is now. Jesus is calling, and he is waiting for his church to respond.